All right, it is October 3rd, 2025, and Deanna is not in today, but we are joined by Cory Moore and Tamar. I hope I pronounce your name right, Tamar Boghosian.
Yeah.
And I am extremely excited for this episode. We were just chatting before, and Cory asked why I am interested in this topic, which is the topic will be the ongoing debacle or failure or betrayal, depending on the words that you want to use, of Afghan interpreters who helped the Canadian forces during Canada's mission in Afghanistan. As those who listen to the podcast or watch the YouTube know, I am a big history buff, one, and also was very briefly a reservist and know people who served in Afghanistan. And this is a topic that I have wanted to do for a while, but was not sure who the ideal guest would be. I didn't feel confident to describe the history and legal matters on my own. And then I saw a CBC article by Priscilla Huang about a person who's both a lawyer and a Canadian Forces veteran, which is Cory Moore, as well as Tamar, who is um, launching numerous court challenges about the ongoing issues with the Afghan interpreters who helped Canada back during the mission and are now still stuck either in Afghanistan or abroad. And so I'm super grateful. I asked Priscilla, can you introduce me to these two? I really want to do an episode on this. And thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thanks for having us, Stephen. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Thank you. We're excited to speak with you.
Right on.
Yeah. I think the best way to start would actually be to go kind of almost back, gosh, 24 years ago. And maybe, Cory, you can talk about sort of how Canada and the Canadian forces wound up in Afghanistan and what your role in the forces were.
Well, I initially joined up to the Canadian Forces in the spring of 2001, and I had been in the training loop early on in my career, and was awaiting my first posting, which was eventually Halifax, when the events of 9/11 transpired. Um, and of course, just like everybody else that was watching the TV at the time, I couldn't help but think that the career that I was about to start as a legal officer in the forces was going to dramatically change, and I was actually thinking of just how soon I would be off to wherever I needed to go in support of our deploying troops. So you asked to go back to the genesis of why we ended up in Afghanistan. Well, of course, it was in relation to what happened, on the morning of 9/11. And if you take that back to the NATO agreement in Article 5, which was immediately invoked for the first time, um, it was, for a lack of a better way of putting it, it was like the Three Musketeers clause of the law. An attack on one is an attack on all,
Mhm.
and Canada was one of the first troop contributing nations to go into Afghanistan with our allies, the United States. That operation was dubbed Operation Enduring Freedom, and I mean, we can go down a little rabbit hole, but I mean, at the end of the day, we had a defense minister fall because he stood up in the House and said, "No, Canada's not in Afghanistan," and we actually did have our special forces on the ground in Afghanistan at the
I
time.
remember that when those
Right, yeah,
pictures of the JTF-2 escorting people came out.
absolutely. So we were right in there right from the beginning, and true to form, um, I was offered my first opportunity to go to Afghanistan in 2004 over the Christmas break. So or over the Christmas period of the year. So I was there from 04 to 05. I was on the ground in Camp Julian. I was one of the operational legal advisors for the task force commander on Op Athena, it was called. And the mission set in those early days was to effect the safe conduct of democratic elections in Afghanistan. It was a political void, as you know, after the Soviets had pulled out of Afghanistan. It was a collection of tribal affiliations and tribal pacts that were ruling Afghanistan. But there was really no centralized leadership per se. And what ended up happening was, out of all those warring factions, the Taliban came to prominence, and they gave safe haven to Osama bin Laden to run his camps. So that's why NATO countries were in Afghanistan initially, and this was our reason for being there. The mission set quickly did change to moving on from the safe conduct of elections into more and more gunfighting, and actually trying to suppress the Taliban resistance that was going on throughout the country. And to that extent, I was deployed a second time in 06, 07 as the embedded legal advisor to our Special Forces contingent in Kandahar. So that was just after Op Medusa. Op Medusa was a fairly decisive battle that took place in the south of Afghanistan in the Kandahar region. And what it really did was it was akin to cutting the head off of the snake, in the sense that there were a lot of leaders that were captured and killed in that operation. And our mission was, in that period of confusion, to round up all the other leadership at the next tier. And we were wildly successful on that mission. We led a lot of capture missions in the south of Kandahar, and we ended up putting a lot of Taliban in Sarposa prison and various other prisons throughout the country. So the reason why I mention all this is because it has a direct relation to the people that I ended up helping through these applications with the IRCC. If you could just bear with me, we'll get to that. But I came back from that second mission in 07, and I honestly didn't think I'd be deploying a third time to Afghanistan. I'd initially put my name in to be air support to the air campaign in Libya, because at the time I was posted in Winnipeg as a legal advisor to NORAD. So I was quite heavily involved in air ops at the time, and I had put my name forward to be the air operations legal advisor to our CF-18 contingent in Libya. Ottawa came back and they said, we'd actually like you to go back to Afghanistan a third time. And this time we'd like you to be a mentor to the Afghan National Army's legal branch. And so I thought about this for a couple of days, and I decided to take it because I was going back in 2011. Again, it was over Christmas. Every one of my deployments had been over Christmas. So, but my point is it had been an 8-year gap between the first time I had gone to when I was going to be going back a third and final time. And I knew it was going to be my final time because there was already talk back in 2011 of winding down the mission sometime in 2014, 2015, that kind of thing. And I just wanted to see the progress, because my second tour, it was truly all gunfighting, and it was operations the whole way through. Um, but this third opportunity to go, it was all about institution building, which was essentially what we'd like to talk about in the legal branch. I mean, at the end of the day, um, you can talk about lofty ideals of empowering women or gender equality, opening up um, opportunities for women. But then it's quite another to actually take lofty ideals uh, and then turn it into reality on the ground. And that was kind of the opportunity that we had. So I happily accepted, and I went into Kabul, and I tried to get the best handover that I could from my colleague who was leaving. And I said, "What kind of work did you do mentoring the legal branch of the ANA?" And she said, "Well, over the course of my 9 months, I facilitated a bunch of think tanks and legal conferences, and I had subject matter experts from Europe fly in, and we did a couple conferences." And I said, "Okay, um, what do you think they're going to need during my rotation?" She says, "Well, that'll be up to you to figure out with who you're being assigned to advise." And I went, "Okay, fair enough." So it was a blank slate. It was an opportunity to do whatever it was that they needed. I certainly don't know Afghan law. They don't know Canadian law. I wasn't there to mentor them on the law. I was there to assist them in any way that I could in order for them to be a better organization and better serve the needs of the Afghan National Army. I was assigned a number of colonels in the legal branch. I was given the colonel of Defense Counsel Services. I was given the colonel in charge of criminal investigations,
These are
because
all Afghans?
these are all Afghans.
Yeah.
I came to quickly find out that the military police in the ANA are illiterate, and they're only utilized for checkpoints and pat downs, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So all the criminal conduct that is alleged within the military at that time was being investigated by lawyers. It was akin to the U.S. model, which had been, I guess, ported over from the U.S. And by all accounts, it was working well. They were running trials. This wasn't like a new legal branch. They had always had a legal branch. They had military judges just like we did. So all this to say, I had the colonel in charge of criminal investigations, the defense commanding officer. I had the colonel in charge of recruiting and training. I had a chief of the Military Court of Appeals as one of my colonels. And so what I quickly found out was they were having a real difficulty retaining women in the Afghan National Army, because what was happening, and in particular the military nurses, what was happening was ANA soldiers injured on the battle space are all brought to the Kabul Military Hospital for their operations and for their convalescence. They were sexually assaulting, these soldiers were sexually assaulting the military nurses at the bedside. And in some cases, there was full-on sexual assaults and rapes, to use an outdated term. But this was what was happening, and the attrition rate was through the roof. And the first thing that the colonel in charge of criminal investigations said was, "We've been asking for quite some time for women to be hired as lawyers, because we cannot investigate any of these matters that happen relating to crimes against women, because in their culture, they can only bring forward that complaint to another woman. And the woman has to be someone in authority. And for the most part, to do it properly, The investigator needs to be a woman. The file is handed off to a female prosecutor. The case is brought before a military court, of which there would be maybe a female judge, or at very least, a female clerk of the court. So you've got this conduit where everything has been culturally handled in a very sensitive and proper way.
Yeah.
Okay. So I said to Colonel Momin, why haven't you hired any women then? And he says, well, I can't get the authorization. I said, well, why can't you get the authorization? And he says, I don't know. But we've been asking for quite some time, and it's like, banging your head against the wall. And I said, okay, well, I'll see what I can do. It turns out that just like in Canada at the time, there were 11 law schools operating in Afghanistan. I went, well, how many women graduate from the law schools in Afghanistan? And he says, well, 50%. I said, are you kidding me? I said, that's just like in Canada. And he goes, no. He says, it's been 50% for quite some time. And I said, well, then what's the barrier to coming in to the military? I said, you've obviously got female lawyers that are working downtown, in other areas of government. He goes, oh, yeah. He says, as far as I can tell, we're one of the only organizations that don't have on staff. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to go back to my camp and I'm going to try and advocate for this. So I got deployed on a mission called Op Assistance. And Op Assistance was a NATO training mission, NTMA-Afghanistan. So we were part of the military advisory group - General Service Legal. Okay, it's a big long handle, but the upshot of it all was there was myself as the lone Canadian legal officer there. I was partnered up with a retired CID investigator from the U.S. Army, a guy by the name of Lee Letty, and he had also been a civilian police officer, I believe, in the state of Washington. So Lee's there, and my boss, Colonel Leuwenhaupt, is a U.S. JAG out of San Francisco, and there's one other major, aside from myself, who's a U.S. Legal officer, and to this day, I don't know what he was doing or what function he had, but Colonel Leuwenhaupt had a deputy commanding officer, a DCO, who was another legal officer with the U.S. Marine Corps, and his name was Scott Marconda. So my command group is Colonel Leuwenhaupt, Lieutenant Colonel Marconda. There's a guy by the name of Rick that's attached to our unit. Turns out that he's a guy from the State Department in the U.S., and Rick is there because if anything costs money to make happen, Colonel Leuwenhaupt is the guy that signs off on it, gives it to Rick. Rick goes back to Washington for a check, and then the check gets cut, and whatever program got put into existence is paid for. So I go back to Colonel Leuwenhaupt and I said, I think I know what I want to do for the next 9 months, because it was a 9-month deployment. And he says, what's that? I said, I want to run a recruitment campaign at the Afghan law schools. I want to develop a brochure that's bilingual in Dari and Pashtun. And I want to do a recruitment video. And I'm going to model it off of the recruitment video that you can find on the Canadian Forces website.
Yeah. And this is targeted to Afghan women?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I said, I want to run this video inside the law schools to all the second-year students at all 11 law schools, because it gives them a year out from graduating to get their ducks in a row and make application.
Yeah.
Colonel Leuwenhaupt says, there's no way I'm backing this. He says, it's never going to happen. He says, you're going to waste your time for 9 months and you're not going to accomplish anything. So the answer is no. And I said, are you serious? And he says, it's not going to happen, Cory. He says, I don't know what to tell you. He says, but you're going to have to go back and think of something else to do. So I go back to my colonels, and every time I go around to meet with them, I've got to walk from the camp with my interpreter, who's also my escort for close protection as well. I got to walk over to National Defense Headquarters and find all these colonels, because none of them operate with email or anything like that. It's a very slow and laborious process to try and track down all of your people when they don't know when you're coming. So I finally make the rounds again, and to a man, they all say, no, this is what we really need. I even go down to the military hospital in Kabul, and I meet with the colonel that's running the legal office at the Kabul military hospital. And he says, we desperately need this.
So is the reason just that was there a sense at this time that the mission might not be a success in terms of the Taliban would be coming back?
Well, it's a good question, because if I take myself back to 2011, because I did my workups to go over there in October. I was on the ground in November. And I had been back for like 4 years, from 07 to 11. And, I'm doing my day-to-day business, with NORAD in Winnipeg, and Afghanistan's no longer in my front, in my frontal lobe type thing, right? But I am hearing anecdotally from other colleagues of mine who are still over there, and they're talking more and more and more about how there is green on blue incidents.
Do you want to elaborate on what that means?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Constantly happening. So when you've got a blue on blue scenario, that means that something messed up, and you had friendly fire on friendly fire, blue on blue. But when you've got green on blue, green is the term that's used for your local third-party friendly forces that are not NATO. So essentially, we had a whole bunch of military trainers as part of op assistance that were on the ground, embedded in ANA fighting units. And this trainer would be an artillery officer, or this trainer would be a sergeant who was an infantier, or they were working with howitzers, right, on the 777s. And so we had all kinds of Canadian soldiers, and every NORAD country, or pardon me, every NATO country had trainers, or many of these nations had trainers embedded in Afghan units out in the field. Well, what was happening was these NATO soldiers were being attacked by their Afghan colleagues when they should have been completely safe. So what does that really mean? It really means that the Taliban had infiltrated the ANA and had its own agents in field units that were killing NATO soldiers, or at least attacking them, which is very, very unnerving. Yeah. Very unnerving. You have to be able to trust the people that you're there on the ground with.
Did you have people when you were there telling you, like, Cory, is there a way I can go to Canada? Because the Afghan interpreter program started under the Conservatives. It was very small, so there was a demand at the time for it. Did you see that personally, where people were like, we need help getting out?
No, and I'll go back to a story from my first deployment. When I was at Camp Julian, I had the letter from the Treasury Board, Secretariat of Canada, giving me the financial authority to settle financial claims caused by Canadian Forces operations. So what that really meant was I would hold traffic court outside the gates to Camp Julian once every 2 weeks. And if our heavy military vehicles ran over taxi cabs or crushed grape huts, or we shot up half a flock of sheep, or God forbid, we killed an Afghan citizen, it was my responsibility to pay out compensation in US dollars for these incidents. And the interpreter that I was using at the table, he was contracted by the US government. He had been loaned to our operations, really great guy. And once I went back to Canada after that first tour, I never expected to ever see him again. But on my third tour, I'm actually walking over to Defense Headquarters and I run into the guy. And so I said, hey, how are you doing? It's been 8 years. Like you do actually forge relationships with people. And I worked with this guy intimately for 6 months. And I said, because I had heard from the interpreter pool in the legal advisory office, there were 4 interpreters in that office. They were all going through the process of getting their U.S. Papers in order.
Mm-hmm.
And Colonel Lewenhaupt and Rick were pushing their papers through. And so I knew that this was a movement that was now afoot. And so I asked him if he was actively, putting his papers in to go to the States. And he says, yep, all my papers are in. And I said, great. And like, that was the end of it. Right. So all this to say, I go back to my people and I say, Colonel Lewenhaupt doesn't really think I'm going to get far with this. I said, I think in order to get a little bit of momentum here, if you really want this, you're going to go and have to talk to your JAG and convince him that this is something that collectively all 6 of you colonels need and that I'm willing to help you with. So they all said, yeah, we're going to talk to the JAG. I go back and talk to Colonel Lewenhaupt and I said, listen, I know you told me to let it go, but they're going to talk to the JAG. If the JAG says yes, then what do you think? And he says, well, the JAG's not going to say yes. And I said, okay, well, let's just give it a go. And so I say a week goes by and I get feedback from a few of the colonels that the JAG is scared. The JAG is scared to do it. He's not opposed to it, but he's scared to do it. And I said, well, do you think that we can have a meeting then with the JAG? If Colonel Lewenhaupt says, I'm going to be okay to meet with the JAG, then let's see if we can talk about this. I go back, not to, get into Colonel Lewenhaupt's soup, because he's there to advise the Minister of Defense in Karzai's cabinet. He's there to advise the Chief of Defense Staff, and he's there to advise the JAG. And I got the next tier. So I go back to Colonel Lewenhaupt and I said, if the JAG is willing to see me, are you prepared to let me talk to the JAG? I said, I know I'm punching above my weight a bit here.
Yeah.
And I said, if you'd like, I said, would you like to come and make introductions at the same time?
And so you get the school?
Yeah. And he says no. He says no again. He says no. And at that point, like I went back to my desk and I thought to myself, listen, I want this deployment to work. I want everything to be copacetic with who I'm working with and what have you. But at the end of the day, I have to be cognizant of the fact that I'm there as the lone Canadian representative, representing the government of Canada, representing our foreign policy. And what's important to our government at least I thought at the time, was the advancement of women's rights in furtherance to, um,
Yeah.
the UN conventions and everything. So I'm there to bring our Canadian values to this mission set. And so I thought, okay, I get a phone call from the JAG back home at around this time. Every legal officer gets a, "Hey, how you doing? Have you settled in?" type of phone call after about 3 weeks. I'm on the phone with my JAG. Great guy. His name's Blaise
Yeah.
Cathcart. Blaise Cathcart. And I said, "Hey, listen, I don't want to cause any ruffles here." I said, "But this is what's happening." I said, "I firmly believe I can make this happen. If I need to phone, like if I need to hit the bat phone and call you
Yeah.
on this to talk to Colonel Lewenhaupt, would you?" And he says, "Absolutely."
But it does work, right? Like I need to, just looking at the time, like there is like the school does get created.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, I go back to Colonel Lewenhaupt and I said, "Look, I'm not going to let this go. I had a conversation with my JAG. He thinks it's a great idea. If if I come up empty after 9 months, it's on him. It's not on you." And he said, "Okay, fine." So
Yeah.
he kind of threw his hands up in the air and he introduced me to the JAG. And I had 3 meetings with the JAG. And the JAG basically said, "I don't want to do it. I'm afraid for my family. There's night letters that happen all the time. Um, um, these threats that are contained in the night letters, they actually do get carried out. I worry for my daughters and my wife."
So the JAG is Afghan.
Yes,
Yeah.
Brigadier General Harari.
Yeah.
So
So, but the school is created and it worked. Like, I mean, for the time that it ran, the CBC article mentions like they did prosecute former or current Taliban.
yes, what ended up happening was the JAG went from being opposed to it to saying, "Yes, I agree with you, Cory. I do want to be an instrument of change. I am a leader. If not me, then who else is going to step up? My wife is an educated woman. She would be proud of me." All of the things that I said to him to appeal to
Yeah.
his, I said, "What would your daughters think of you? They'd be proud of you." And he
Yeah.
came around. And so I got the authorization to speak with Karzai's Minister of Communication.
Yeah.
He gave me letters of authorization. I think it was 8 of them. And with these letters of authorization, I could go anywhere in the country by helicopter and film on any Afghan military base.
Yeah.
So I could put this video together. And the video was intended to show female law grads of the many different types of law they could be practicing within the Afghan National Army, whether it's operational law, criminal law, or administrative law.
Yeah.
There's a pathway for you.
And so they're doing it all. Um, just looking at the time, I want to jump to where things obviously take a very bad turn,
Sure.
which would be mid 2021, August 2021. I'm sure most people listening know that's when the Taliban essentially they retake the country. Um, can you describe, like, for you that moment?
Well, it was incredibly disappointing. I mean, we've had 159 Canadians that gave their lives in Afghanistan to see all of the progress made largely evaporate
Yeah.
in the course of a week and a half to 2 weeks. Incredibly disappointing that despite all the training to provide them with competencies, to defeat the Taliban on their own, without the U.S. there and without a phased approach to the withdrawal, there was no chance that they were going to be able to stand on their own like that. You just can't snap your fingers
Yeah.
and walk out in a country and expect it to be stable. And of course, everything collapsed. So incredibly disappointing.
In
And
the lead up to it, were people contacting you? Or Tamar, did you have an active Afghan practice at the time?
I did not have an active
No,
Afghan.
like our firm, I just remember one instance at our firm where there was a spousal sponsorship for someone who was in Kabul, and the Canadian government emailed basically like something that was in, I think, Dari and English, and said, if you can get to a printer, print it and try to show it to Taliban people at checkpoint. And all it said was, please let, like essentially it said, this person has been approved for a Canadian visa. Please let them go to the airport in Kabul. And there was no official marking really. It looked like anything that anyone could print. Our client was saying, well, is this going to work with the Taliban? And the lawyer at our firm said, I have no idea. I don't think they were able to get to the airport. And it was just chaos.
it
And the
was.
government had all these programs that they were in the lead up trying to do, but like it didn't, obviously, as you know, and we'll now come to your initiative, a lot of people were left behind.
Well,
And I mean, in your case, you're still lobbying for people from your school.
well, I am. So there's not really a school per se, Stephen, involved in this. It was just the video was shown at the law schools.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening was 2 years later, I get a phone call from Lee Letty, who's still in Kabul. And he tells me that the 8 female legal officers that we had advocated to be hired were actually hired.
Yeah.
So this was a momentous thing. It happened 2 years after I left. And what I didn't know was Lee had mentioned at the same time, not only did the video get played repeatedly over the course of those 2 years in the law schools, but the Minister of Communication had put it on national television. And
Yeah.
I said, "You're kidding." He goes, "No." He said they had a whole bunch of applications. They took the 8 best ones and they put them in every position that you asked for. I asked for 2 to go to prosecutions, 2 to be investigators, another 2 investigators down in Kandahar, a clerk of the court, and then one was going to be in the chief of staff office
Yeah.
to the
So
ANH.
all positions that would leave them very vulnerable
Exactly.
after
So
2021.
what ended up happening was one of the lawyers reached out to me on my cell phone. And of course, he didn't, I mean, I knew exactly who it was in broken English. And this probably happened about 4 or 5 days after the government fell. And, I gave him my email address and we started corresponding. And that led to my asking him, who in the video can you actually get a hold of so that I can start to help you? And which of the 8 female legal officers that were hired can you contact and put them in the group? So of the 8, we've got 2 in the group. And then we've got, I think, five lawyers that were in the video to begin with. But this is what I want to impress to the listeners of this podcast. When I went to these young lawyers at the time in 2011, a lot of them were like 24, 23, 25, newly married. They had 1 or 2 kids that were like a year or 3 years old. Many of them had little girls. I explained to them why I wanted them to role play in the video to demonstrate, what lawyers can be doing. I said, "Are you willing to do it?" And a couple of them thought about it for a couple of days. Many of them just said, yeah, I think this is fantastic. But you had all these young, idealistic lawyers, educated, wanting to see the advancement of women's rights in their country, wanted to see these new colleagues of theirs to become role models for other young girls going to university. Like, they all believed in it. And not only did it run on national TV for the 2 years between 2012 and 2014 when Lee called me, but the video ran all the way until the fall of the government in 2021. So let me put that into perspective. That video was seen on national TV for over 9 years, and it was salacious. It was provocative. Every single Taliban member in Afghanistan knows exactly which 5 or 6 lawyers were responsible for recruiting women who came on board, and then they went on to prosecute captured Taliban on the battle space that the US forces were continuing to bring in from 2014 to 2021. So I was saying to a friend the other day, do you think these people are known across Afghanistan? They sure are. Like, everybody in Canada knows the national spokesperson for A&W. He's been on TV for the last 10 years. Everybody knows the A&W guy. Well, everybody knows these 5 lawyers. And so now I go back to my story about Sarposa prison. When the Taliban took over the country, when the US left, the first thing they did was they opened up the gates to Sarposa prison and every other prison across the country. And the Taliban made it known that the first people that they were going to be going after were military judges and military lawyers that put them in prison in the first place. So when I say in my submissions to the IRCC that their lives are in danger, I'm not kidding around.
Yeah. So let's jump to IRCC. Canada had the special measures for Afghanistan. What were your general thoughts? I'll be honest, I haven't done an application under the measures. I don't know if you had, Tamar, but in general, how do you think that program worked? Obviously, we're here because it didn't for these women, but in general, for others, how did the program work?
So the program was, I'm sure you're familiar, it's basically like a web form.
Mm-hmm.
And my first interaction with the program was through Cory, because he had submitted these 12 expression of interests. And essentially it was a web form, and you would just get that generic response saying your application has been submitted. And then in turn, I'll pass it on to Cory, but I believe he got an email, and it was one of those generic emails we also get when we submit a web form saying thank you for your interest.
Yeah, it's being processed. It gave you the impression that your submission had been accepted and it was going to be considered. And at the time of doing this in the fall of 2021, nobody knew of the phrase expression of interest because it didn't appear anywhere on the website. Mm-hmm. Tamara and I, we just kind of called them a pre-screening application, because we were told, when I didn't hear anything back after about 3-4 weeks, I started calling the IRCC trying to get somebody on the phone. I finally managed to get somebody on the phone, and that person said, these are screening applications, and they go to a case analyst. The case analyst will read the submissions, and they'll make a decision whether or not your primary applicant will be accepted into the program and then assigned a G number, which is the official way in which to kickstart an application. And then detailed instructions will then follow to the primary applicant as to what they had to do to further along the application. So I said, okay, well, can you tell me if they've been assessed yet or looked at. And she goes, no, I don't have access to any of that. I can't help you out. So the number that I ended up calling to get somebody was like an emergency line. It had really had nothing to do with the special program, but it at least told me that even though I wasn't hearing anything back, there was a process going on in the background, and it had gone to an analyst and it was being considered. So, fast forward to say January, February, was it?
This year?
No, 2022.
We met in August 2022.
August-
We resubmitted in August.
August 2022.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So by the summertime, I was fairly frustrated, and I thought in my own mind that I had submitted everything properly. Like I had done the personal representative forms. I reached out and I talked to Tamara, and I said, "Could you just double check my work to see if I may have missed anything? I haven't heard anything." So Tamara looked at everything that had been done up to that point. She didn't see anything that I had missed, which I was a little surprised. But nonetheless, she offered to resubmit everything a second time, and we did that. And again, we got the generic email responses back to indicate that the file's being considered. And at the end of the day, we never did hear back from the IRCC with respect to a decision on the merits of any of these 12 cases that I went and submitted on behalf of my group.
So the web form essentially went into the void.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
It did. And so,
it's been called in the case that for those watching on YouTube, I've pulled up and we'll link to in the show notes, that essentially in another case, IRCC argued that they don't really owe a duty to any of these people, and that it's essentially just an expression of interest, and that IRCC tried to punt it to the Department of National Defense and Global Affairs, to which the judge in that case basically said no, and that that person's, quote, preliminary application was stuck at the very beginning of the applicable process because of gross governmental negligence in the implementation of a program that no longer exists. If the court here does not grant the relief by Mr. D in some fashion, he will never have the benefit of a fair process and the possibility of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, i.e. an ITA, enabling him to finally apply for permanent residence. So where does that leave you guys now? There's obviously this case of gross negligence. I have two questions. What are you doing? What are you and Tamar, what legal procedures are you doing? And how does the veteran community in general feel about what's going on?
Okay, well, let me start with the sentiment from the veteran community. I was just recently in touch with a gentleman by the name of John Feltham, and John Feltham is one of the directors of Aman Lara. Aman Lara is a charity that was working directly with the IRCC, I believe under a memorandum of understanding. So there was a direct relationship between Aman Lara and IRCC, and what they were charged with in terms of responsibility was, once a G number was issued to somebody that had been approved for entry under that special program, Aman Lara had people on the ground to safely take them out of Afghanistan into Pakistan to the embassy, the Canadian embassy in Islamabad, and then from there they would be transited to Canada. So Aman Lara is actually Afghan for safe pathway. John, I think, sums up the sentiment of all veterans and myself by saying that we're collectively very, very tired and very frustrated and and upset over the fact that there are so many people, similar to the 12 applicants that I've got, that have seemingly fallen through the cracks with this program. And, veterans are upset because what happened in many, many cases was veterans came forward because they themselves had been contacted by their interpreters back in Afghanistan to say, hey, we're having trouble making application under the program. We're not getting anywhere. Can you help us? Okay, so to give this a little bit of context, though, the special program has been administered, and it's alluded to in the court case, it's been administered by the IRCC, informed by two other ministries, Global Affairs Canada and the Department of National Defense. And so what I mean by informed is the IRCC, in taking on this program, looked first to Global Affairs Canada and D&D for an official referral list of everybody that had been on a contract or had been employed by a company that had a contract with the Canadian government for either interpreter services or, if you're in the embassy, cleaning staff and that kind of thing, right? Okay, so what the IRCC really did was they took those lists from those two agencies and they automatically approved all of those people that were on the list because they were all verified contracted employees. It's interesting because of the case that happened this summer in federal court out of Toronto. It involved someone that had a contractual relationship with Canada because he worked for a company that had a contract with the Canadian Forces. His name got left off the company list that got submitted to the Canadian Forces. And so he's the lone guy who is left out in the cold, wondering what happened when all of his other buddies were granted G numbers and have been in Canada now for like 4 years. Well, it came out in the court case that they weren't even reading these expressions of interest. They were ignoring anything that was coming through their web portal. And all they were doing was processing the people that had come to them on a list from Global Affairs and D&D. So what that really means is all of my people, they were never interpreters under a contract. I never contracted them to help me. They did this because it was the right thing to do. And I largely encouraged them to do it because that was what my job was. I was sent there by the government of Canada to do the very thing that I ended up doing. And when you look at the humanitarian criteria under the special program, it asks, does the applicant have a long standing relationship with the government of Canada as a result of their assistance to someone like myself? Well, I think being on national TV for over 9 years is a lasting relationship with the government of Canada. It's a legacy that we left behind. And the fact that these 8 women were hired, I've asked to do, a couple speaking engagements at the Legion since I've retired. And I was recently at an event, and a Silver Cross mother was in attendance. And the question came to me from the audience, well, do you think it was even worth it? Do you think we should have even bothered? Like, we lost so many lives over in Afghanistan for nothing. And I'm going, well, we did achieve something. Like, we stood up for values, and we hired, like, I can't say that. I cannot tell a Silver Cross mother that their son died for no reason, because her son died for a very good cause and noble cause. And all Canada has to do is keep its promise to bring some of these people that were a part of that to Canada.
Canada. We only have about 5 minutes left. I have a pretty direct question, and then maybe each of you can just give short final thoughts.
Yeah,
Are people who helped Canada dying because of the gross negligence?
Well, we haven't been able to find the other 6 female lawyers that were hired, and I mean,
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, my point of contact, like I know that my 5 or 6 lawyers have spent the last 4 years looking for these 6 women, and nobody can find them. So, do I think at least some of them have been captured and killed? Yes, I do. I firmly believe that. You know, I firmly believe it, because what's more insulting than being prosecuted by a military lawyer? It's being prosecuted and convicted by a female military lawyer.
Yeah. No, oof. Yeah, no,
So
I'm really sorry to hear that.
yeah. So and I like to also think that, you know, the gravitas that they collectively had to break this glass ceiling and to be prosecuting under those conditions, like that is incredibly courageous and brave. And there's not too many prosecutors in this country, I don't think, that they can honestly say that, you know, they've prosecuted in a similar climate, unless it's dealing with organized crime, right? One of those mega trials. But yeah. So you asked earlier, Stephen, like, what are we going to be doing next? We're going to try very hard down the political path to see if we can get these 12 cases in particular looked at and G numbers issued without any further delay. And if it doesn't come to pass, then we'll make an application in the federal court as well. Plain and simple.
Yeah,
but
no, and
we're hoping that it won't come to that, because just as the judge said in the last case, it really shouldn't be up to these people halfway across the world with intermittent internet service, and they're running for their lives, and they're working menial cash jobs in anonymity. It's hard for them to be forced to have to litigate to have their cases heard under a program that the government put up specifically to benefit them. So the judge said, hopefully, you know, we're not going to have more applicants go to court for this, but if that's the only way that we're going to be able to get someone to look at these cases for the first time, I should add.
Because hopefully it doesn't. I mean, it seems like such a for a government and a department that's often starved of good news, like doing what they can for these,
like, this should be
these 2 remaining women.
This should be a good news story. This should be a good news story. This should be an example of everything right that we did when we went over there. These 12 people should be celebrated and welcomed with open arms, not being forced to go to federal court.
And hopefully, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I like it's the part where you mentioned how many are not able to be contact, just it's shaking. And hopefully to the extent that any audience, I mean, I know there's certain people in government who do listen, and to the extent that this podcast can help, I'm glad. But I totally wish you like the best with this. Like, it really is heartbreaking.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. All I can say is that I hope some people here in Ottawa, we're going to put a package of all their documents together, all 12, in a binder. We're going to put the case in. We're going to put a cover letter from tomorrow. I've got a statutory declaration in there. We're going to put a number of these packages together, and with the help of a political staffer on the Hill who happens to know some people in the Liberal Party and the NDP and the Conservatives, we're hoping next week that multiple copies of these documentary packages land in the right hands and we get a response that's favorable. Yep.
All right. Best of luck.
Thanks very much.